They can't live off of soy nuggets and chips. We know. We try to anyway, but we know. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Gita Marie and today we're going to answer the age-old question. We're going to talk about ultra-processed foods. I have done in the past a specific deep dive impact analysis on fast food overall, and a lot of the points are also present in that video, but we're going to expand on a specific question in this video, which is, are vegan meat substitutes, which are ultra-processed foods, unhealthy, or are they unhealthier than meat? I would like to preface this video by saying, not a dietitian. So while I obviously have my own opinions, I will leave sources for everything down below. We are not going to make wild assumptions based on gut and vibe feeling. Nah. But I do have some sources with me today that are incredibly insightful, that I really recommend looking at. This topic impacts my work quite a bit actually, because I work a lot with food and green transition when it comes to food and sustainable food systems. And in that work, I talk a lot about plant-based foods, plant-based whole food, as well as plant-based meat substitutes. And this is one of the things that I hear the most often, and I have so many things to say about it. So with the support of actual dietitians, experts, and scientists, let's talk about if ultra-processed vegan meat substitutes are actually more unhealthy than meat products. Let's go. First of all, and this is where my first pet peeve sort of springs up, but the term ultra-processed foods is used incredibly inconsistently in the media today. On social media, in the press. So I think it's fair that we see a lot of people misinterpreting what this term actually means, what it indicates, because it's being used to say a whole bunch of things that has nothing to do with whether or not something's ultra-processed. Anyway, ultra-processed foods, aka UPF, is an umbrella term that's used to describe group 4 foods on the NOVA classification. NOVA classification being divided into 4 groups, where we have completely unprocessed whole ingredients, we have slight processing, we have processing, and we have ultra-processed foods. I will leave the concrete definitions of these different groups on the screen, and also via a link in the description if you're interested. But overall, you could say Group 1 is completely unprocessed, and the more processing, the higher the category. When something is ultra-processed, it generally just means that food has been fortified, made in factories with industrial equipment, or with added ingredients like additives, sweetness, thickeners, anti-foam agents, or foam agents, carbonation, overall techniques of modification that can't be replicated by home cooks. I feel like the rule of thumb here is that something is an ultra-processed food if it can't be made in your home kitchen, which I know creates a very subjective spectrum here, but I hope you know where I'm getting at. Now, the thing is here that group 4 foods on the NOVA classification has been made synonymous with unhealthy foods, because a lot of highly processed foods tend to also have high contents of sugars and fats and sodium. Things like fast food, chips, snacks, sweets, but also many types of bread and frozen meals, things that are typically dense in calories and are very easy to overconsume. But here's the kicker. The NOVA classification system has been wildly criticized for being oversimplified. It groups certain foods together that share little to no nutritional similarities, and in doing so, these products are being presented as either healthy or unhealthy. And I see this a lot, both out in the real world as well as in my comment section, when I share recipes that involve vegan substitutes, for instance, or oat milk, or tofu, or any kind of sauce, etc. Some viewers will comment that my recipes are unhealthy inherently because they contain a lot of ultra-processed foods. And I take slight issue with that, not only because the whole idea of saying something is healthy or unhealthy is an oversimplification of what healthy food really entails. You can eat basically anything you want and have a healthy diet if you include balanced meals and moderation. So overall, and this is just my own personal opinion, it's really unhelpful to label certain foods as good or bad, or certain foods as healthy or unhealthy, because it doesn't really matter what they look like without context in a vacuum, right? What matters is the context that they're placed within, aka what your entire diet looks like, what kind of foods you are also eating. Are you only eating ultra-processed foods? Are you only eating chicken nuggets? Are you only eating processed bread and cake and chips and sweets? Or is that something you enjoy once in a while you also have a balanced meal? So my main issue with the group 4 NOVA classification of ultra-processed foods is that it's a really, really big category of food because it includes everything that is also fortified or where any kind of modification has been happening, which means that you can take a carton of oat milk that has a simple ingredients list, no bullshit there, and then fortify it with calcium, which overall only has positive health benefits, and that will make it an ultra-processed food in the same category as cakes and ice creams and chips. And you would think that everyone would know that those two aren't equal in nutritional value, but you would be surprised. This is sort of where the misunderstandings arise, because just because something is classified as a group 4 food, aka it's ultra-processed, doesn't necessarily mean that it's always bad for you. And if something is in group 1, aka if it's completely unprocessed, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you. It's basically the is it natural or is it not natural discussion all over again. Not everything that's natural is good and sustainable, and not everything that is unnatural is bad and polluting. It's exactly the same thing. Who could have known that the world would be so full of nuances and shit? So annoying, honestly. A really good example of how a completely unprocessed food is not necessarily very good for us is red meat, which on the NOVA classification is an unprocessed food, but obviously that doesn't mean that no processes has been involved with creating this food. There are many processes that are not accounted for or used in the parameters for the NOVA classification that is involved in animal agriculture, but that's not what NOVA is talking about. It's just okay. Red meat has been linked to higher mortality from cardiovascular disease, coronary disease, and stroke, yet it's classified as an unprocessed or a minimally unprocessed food. But that doesn't mean that it's healthy at all. There's plenty of evidence to suggest the contrary, no matter what the carnivore influencers are saying. And I've seen several experts call for more nuanced categorizations simply to avoid ultra-processed food becoming this wide umbrella term that keeps people from eating tofu, for instance. Because tofu is technically a group 3 food on the NOVA classification, but if you buy pre-marinated tofu, it's an ultra-processed food all of a sudden. The proportion of the food that we eat that's accounted for by ultra-processed food varies wildly when we look at global statistics. UPFs make up 16% of calorie intake in Colombia, about 20% in Taiwan, and about 22% in Brazil. On the other hand, they make up 48% in Canada, 57% in the UK, and 58% in the US. And there are some demographics in North America where 80% of the food that they eat is accounted for by ultra-processed food. When we look at the overall studies, this can definitely be a bad thing, but there are also upsides to having food be processed or ultra processed. One of the upsides is that it tends to be more shelf stable, and in food deserts this is absolutely vital. But let's go back to vegans and people on plant-based diets eating more ultra processed food and what that even means, because I have seen this study specifically being thrown in the face of vegans with this sort of gotcha vibe all the time, and I really want to talk about it because once again, because ultra processed food is such a wide category, it can be really difficult to zoom in on specific types of foods within this category. This study specifically looked at plant-based ultra-processed food, and the study found that people who eat those foods the most have a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. The study mainly looked at foods that are vegan by default, not substitutes or alternatives to already pre-existing foods, but they also looked at sweets, bread, chips, that kind of thing. All those food products that are just vegan, no bullshit there, were included in this study. And looking further into this, the study also found that people that are eating less processed, plant-rich or plant-sourced foods didn't have higher risk of cardiovascular disease. So the less processing, the better. And look, this is really where we have to make use of our common sense, because I am pretty much certain that there's not a single plant-based baddie or vegan out there that are not painfully aware that they can't live off of soy nuggets and chips. We know. We try to anyway, but we know. Most people are aware of this. I tend to make these generalizations and, you can be disappointed, but I would go out on a limb here and say that most people know, especially people that have already altered their diet because of environmental or ethical reasons, aka vegans and people that follow a plant-based diet. They already know this. No one has claimed that these kinds of foods are actively healthy. It's just they aren't necessarily as unhealthy as the alternative. A 2021 French study found that ultra-processed foods made up more of the overall calorie intake of non-meat eaters than meat eaters. Ultra-processed foods accounted for 37% and 39% of energy intake for vegetarians and vegans, mainly due to meat and dairy substitutes, because those products are classified as ultra-processed foods. You can make these things yourself. I've made oat milk several times. You can make your own seitan. You can make your own tofu. It's just most consumers that are trying to transition into a different diet typically won't, as a default at least. To add a little bit of context, according to this study, meat eaters had an overall calorie intake from ultra-processed food at around 33%. So 33 in comparison to 37/39. And while the vegan participants consumed more ultra-processed foods, they also consumed more unprocessed foods, fewer fatty foods, and less sweets. Studies from multiple European countries have also notable associations between multiple diseases, including type 2 diabetes and ultra-processed foods in general. Yet some of these same studies found lesser risk for plant-based alternatives compared to animal-based products. And a 2024 US study concluded that the strongest links between mortality and ultra-processed foods showed up in ready-to-eat products around meat, poultry, and seafood. So it's not just enough to look at whether or not something is ultra-processed. What the ultra-processed foods contain is ultimately where it's at. And of course, the majority of experts agree that a diet that is mainly based on whole foods is always the best. But eating plant-based alternatives and meat substitutes have better health outcomes than eating ultra-processed meat products. There was this study that found that a vegan sausage had twice the nutritional value of a pork sausage, for instance. And this 2024 study found that plant-based meat alternatives were overall lower in saturated fat, monosaturated fat, cholesterol, and calories, while being higher in fiber and carbohydrate and polyunsaturated fat than meat products. I will link all this information down below, and honestly, you don't need a PhD, nor do you have to read through all these studies to find out what is most healthy or most sustainable. It's just about using our common sense. And maybe not falling for the demonization of whole ass food categories. I could make a whole entire video about seed oils and the hysteria related to seed oils, but spoiler alert, it's fine. You're literally good, girl. It's okay. Experts agree that what mainly matters is our overall diet pattern, the way that we eat food over longer periods of time, and zooming in on specific products isn't necessarily very helpful for our understanding of what is healthy or unhealthy. But this video is specifically made just to give you guys some information and resources when someone comes at you and claims that your plant-based meat substitutes, because they are ultra-processed and unnatural, are thus also more unhealthy. That is simply not the case, and there's plenty of scientific data to back that up. We can also look at this study for a second. According to this 2025 review, many of the health risks linked to ultra-processed foods appear to mainly come from sugar drinks and processed meats, not necessarily from all processed foods equally. Even though plant-based meats are processed, the study argues that they're still better than the foods they're designed to replace, especially processed meats like sausages, bacon, and hamburgers. Hell yeah. So to conclude on this a little bit, this has nothing to do with me trying to tell you what to eat and what not to eat. This is to give you some resources and an overview over the amount of misinformation and disinformation that is so easy to come across when looking for nutritional facts on the internet, looking for recipes, and overall just trying to navigate our food system. There's a lot of things being said about unnatural foods, aka vegan and vegetarian meat and dairy substitutes. And this pushback against alternatives for meat and dairy ultimately, in my opinion, comes from people feeling threatened, or people just really, really loving the taste of meat and they don't want to hear the criticism of it. But this is not me telling you what to eat. It's just, if we look at health factors, as well as ethics, as well as the environmental factors, there are ways that are more gentle and there are ways that are definitely less gentle. And with that, thank you so much for watching this video. If you want recipes, meal ideas, any kind of inspiration when it comes to, well, what the fuck are we eating then if we are trying to avoid meat and dairy? I got you, my friend. I have recipes, video guides. I also have a cookbook. I'll link it down below, and let me know if you make any of my recipes. That would make my day. And thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Take really good care of yourselves. Until then. Bye.